Today on Everyday Injustice, we have Nakia Porter, who along with her attorney, Yasin Almadani, are here on a very disturbing police incident that happened in Solano County. And Nakia was involved in a serious police use of force case where she was pulled over having tried to change drivers with her family in the car, her father in the car, and it turned into a very ugly incident. So welcome to our show, and hopefully one of you can give kind of the basic background of what happened.
So I can start with that, and then I'll have Nakia, she can jump in and describe to you more of the personal experience. But I can kind of lay the groundwork. One of the things that's very clear, and you have protections under California law, and it's actually in the penal code. It's in Penal Code 853.5, which is that if law enforcement stops you for an infraction, they are not allowed to take you into custody unless you refuse to present your ID, or you refuse to sign the ticket, or you have some sort of a warrant out for your arrest. And so what happened here is Nakia and her father, with 3 kids in the car, 3, 4, and 6, were doing the responsible thing. Nakia had gotten tired. They were about midway back home from Oakland. And so they pulled over off the freeway to change drivers as safely as possible. They pulled onto a side road that had no traffic and was not a thoroughfare, and they proceeded to stop and change drivers. That's when these officers rolled up to them. And even when they rolled up, you can see in the tape, Nakia is trying to explain to the officers that she is simply switching seats with her father. One of the officers, actually, the first officer that approaches her, just gives her permission. It's like, okay, yeah, just go in the car. Nakia acknowledges. And then the male officer comes in very, very aggressively and starts demanding for her to get back in the car. She tries to explain, yeah, there are kids in the car. That's exactly what we're doing. We're just switching drivers. And he says again, get back in the car. She says, okay. So she's now going back to the driver's seat like they've asked her to, complete compliance. And he decides that he's going to take her into custody anyway. And he does not have a right. They do not have a right to do that. They proceeded to take her into custody, drag her out of the view of the camera, and then beat her out of consciousness. And the whole thing is on video, and her father and her kids are there watching this horrific incident. And after that, they ended up taking her father into custody, putting him in the back of a car, even though he was completely compliant. You imagine how hard it must be for a father to have to watch his daughter get unjustifiably beat up like this. How hard it must have been on him to go through that. So they arrest him, put him in the back of a car, and leave the kids there. These officers walking around with guns drawn, shotguns. Imagine the state that the kids are in at this point, and both of these folks. So they're now assaulting 3 generations of Black folks, all at one time, completely unjustified. And after all of this, they falsely make up a story against her, which their sergeant helped them with, and then try to book her and get her prosecuted, but she wasn't prosecuted. So from a legal perspective, just about every civil rights violation that they could have committed, they did.
Do they have the right to order her back into the car at the point when they did?
They can ask her to go back inside the car, and that's fine if they want her to go back inside the car and wait inside the car, and that's exactly what she was doing. 2 people are outside the car. They're trying to switch. She's telling them, we're switching. We're both trying to get back in the car. They insist that she walk back around and go to the driver's seat. Fine, she's going to do that. She was trying to do that. So yeah, they can ask her to do that, but she was doing it. You know, she was just explaining to them what was going on. There was no reason to put their hands on her. Anyway, Nakia, I'll let you go through the more personal story, and you know, I'll address more of the legal questions, but I wanted to give you the legal framework here.
Well, let me just ask you, Nakia, what's going through your mind first when the sheriff's first approach, and then as this incident unfolds?
So David, before I answer your question, I want to frame this in such a way where you can connect with it, right? Your wife's name is Cecilia.
Mm-hmm.
You have 3 children of your own, right?
Mm-hmm.
How old are your children?
My youngest is 10.
Okay, 10. And then your other 2?
My oldest is 18, but I have a 12-year-old daughter too.
Awesome. So mine, right, as Yasin mentioned, at the time, my youngest, my son, was almost 2. He wasn't in the car, but my niece, who was 3, my middle daughter, 4, and my oldest daughter, 6, right? So now you have these youth, and I'm trying to switch drivers with my dad. As you know, I'm sure with you riding with your wife, you've had times where it's like, hey, honey, tired, let's switch, let's do this, because that's the best thing for all of us, right? And so that's exactly what we're doing. So to get to your question about them approaching us and asking us these questions, it's very confusing because I'm not doing anything out of the ordinary, right? I'm tired. We're getting off the road, getting safely off the road to switch drivers. And I'm now being approached with questions about, not questions, but demands to get back in the car. And I'm following all of those things. I'm complying with every request that's being made. And then they start to escalate. So you ask me, how do I feel? Very confused. And I'm trying to ask questions to clarify, right? Communication is very important. I value that very much so. And the communication was not clear, which left me in a very confused and scared state. Because now I'm trying to simply switch drivers and there's a certain level of escalation happening. So what do I do, right? And so to answer your question, very confused and scared for my life at this point in time.
And go ahead.
Yeah, you know, I want to sort of add in there, as you watch the video, you will see that Nakia and her father, they go you know, do their 3-point turn, and they've stopped already.
Yep.
You can actually notice, you can see the details if you watch it. You can see when a car goes from drive to park, right?
Yep.
You can see the reverse lights come on for a split second and they go off. You can see that happen. You can see her switching gears to park. You can see the doors opening, and an officer at that point just comes up sort of to the side of the car with the lights. In a normal, you know, and they're saying it's a traffic stop. There's no traffic stop. These folks were already stopped. You just came there. They have no idea why they're being stopped, right? Or why you're there. Except they weren't even stopped. They don't even have any idea why you're there. They're starting to pepper her with questions, and she is very calmly, very clearly explaining to them what's happening and following their commands. It's very clear. So this is, you'll see this, and you, if you go through the video step by step, you're going to see how this unfolds. And this male deputy decided that, you know what, he was gonna put hands on her and violate her civil rights, and his partner who was there decided she was gonna help him. You know, you can see it unfold in front of your eyes, and as I watch it, it makes me cringe as I know what's coming.
Do you get a sense of why they responded as they did?
And I'll take you back to a little bit of history, right? So you heard of the 3/5 compromise, yes? Where Blacks, those of African descent were treated less than human, right? And when you treat something less than human, you can do just about anything to it because it doesn't have a soul. It doesn't live, right? It's not the same as those that are human, those that have that privilege, right? And so I was faced with that experience where I was looked at because of the color of my skin, right? That I was less than human, right? And I bring that back to why I talk about your wife and your children. There's no type of compassion of, oh, there are children in the car, which I articulated multiple times, right? For the safety of my children, for the safety of my father, right? To make sure that we're taken care of. And as peace officers, those to be able to actually have justice fell right back into the history lines of treating us less than human. And so to have that, that is very terrifying as we sit in 2021, right? George Floyd was just before then, right? Breonna Taylor, others that this is consistently happening to. And a lot of times it goes unseen because we think it's a one-off situation. Here you have, as Yasin has said, a perfect model of the model citizen. I've gone to school. I pay my taxes. I follow the rules. I do what I'm supposed to do. I work in the community. And still, somehow, I find myself in this position of doing everything right and still being treated less than human. So why is it? Because of the color of my skin.
And you'd also note that, you know, throughout the encounter, her father, who's 63 years old, and this deputy, I don't know, 30 at the time, I can't tell his age, but something like that, keeps calling him young man, reminiscent of the slur boy. So this is reminding him of, especially throughout the experience that they were being put through. And the sergeant who came and helped them cover things up, that sergeant has affiliations with the 3%ers, who we know their membership, we've seen, espouses a lot of racist rhetoric. And it's kind of, that's where this is coming from.
Yeah.
That's where this is coming from. And so, as we get through discovery in this case, I think that what's going on at the Solano County Sheriff's Office and the sort of behavior and the practices that are being condoned are going to come out.
Yeah. And that's really crucial as we paint this picture, right? Not only flat, but really in 3D, right? Because there's a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy. She's actually from California. And talking about what has happened in the beginning of time, or even the formation of America, and how a lot of Africans were brought over to the States to do work, right? To whether it's sugarcane farms or cotton, right? Or different farming things and techniques, and doing that work from sunup to sundown, whipping them, right? These are what I'm talking about, my ancestors going through the same experience. And again, here we are in 2021, and I find myself in a similar experience of being ripped from my children. No one should have to go through that. It's not okay, right? And now we have 3 generations. Now I speak to you, David, I speak to anyone else as you're watching this. It's not just this one incident. It's happening and it's being covered up, right? When I say covered up, we want to bring these things to light so we can say, I see life in you. In other cultures, you have namaste. I can see the God in you. I see that in you. So that means I'm going to treat you with respect. I'm going to treat you with compassion. If we have a disagreement, right, we can work that out because we're civil and we can communicate with each other to share our differences. And I was not given that opportunity. My father was not given that opportunity. My children were not given that opportunity. I was left unable to protect them. Mothers and fathers, aunts, uncles, even friends know what it's like to want to protect your child. Think about your child running out into the street and someone is driving really fast. You want to grab the child, you want to protect them, you want to get them back, you want to make sure that they're safe. And even now, people put the little cones where people drive really fast, right, to say, slow down. There's children here. And so what we're talking about is something that is systemic, something that is ongoing. And this puts a staker and a time mark to say, enough is enough. There has to be a change, not only to support, right, those that are in power, but to support those, the voiceless, those that are being mistreated, those that don't have the platforms to be able to speak up for themselves. And because they don't, and they're quote unquote underrepresented or underserved or minorities, their lives don't matter as much. And I'm here to say everyone, right, has to do their part in saying that this is not how we want to treat each other. Because now you're impacting multiple generations over and over and over again. And what happens is it not only impacts my community, but it impacts our whole families all together. Because if we're hurting, all the other communities are hurting too, because we all are interconnected.
So, go ahead.
Oh no, go. All I wanted to add in that is that, you know, this whole issue gets very politicized and conflated, and I don't, you know, I think people recognize that you need enforcement of laws, but at the same time, it can't be riddled with abuse of power.
There you go.
You know, these folks have been given a certain authority, but that authority is limited by the Constitution. That authority is limited by human rights. The authority is limited by basic rights. And I think that we have stopped almost recognizing that. You know, there is a problem. There needs to be a recognition that there is a problem, and we need to do something about that problem.
Yeah.
Because people are getting hurt, people are dying.
Yes.
And it's going to continue until the law catches up with what's going on practically. And, you know, that's part of that's part of the impetus of bringing a lawsuit like this, is to address it. And thank goodness we live in a system where we can bring a lawsuit to address it. And we are, and I hope that there are changes, that Congress makes more changes to the law so that these type of lawsuits have even more power to them. Because when we hold these officers, the ones that commit the violations, many good officers, right? But there are ones that commit these violations. We hold these officers accountable. We change the practice.
Yeah.
We let them off the hook despite the violation, because, you know, we're on team officers or we're on team civil rights. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
We should all be on team civil rights. They should be on team civil rights because they're hired to uphold the law, you know, not break it. And so everybody should be on board with this.
One thing I worry about is, and you know, a few weeks ago I had on this show the mother and an attorney of somebody who basically, you know, a month or two after George Floyd happened, the same thing happened to this guy. You know, he was having a mental health breakdown. They decided to take him down to the ground. They hold him down, knee to the neck. They're on his back, and he ends up dying. And you know, I'm like, why aren't police learning from the mistakes of other police. They keep making these same mistakes over and over again.
You know,
There's an absence of accountability. I'm sorry, Nakia, go ahead, please.
no, that's good. Accountability. And then also I mentioned that book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, because it talks about the impacts as a whole, right? And so I'll paint this picture. You had times where Blacks were being hung, right? And there were children around. There were aunties, uncles, as if they went out for a celebration, standing behind, wanting pictures of Black people being hung, being, you know, parts of their body being castrated, and the children are smiling. Okay, the children are smiling. So this talks about the being desensitized over generations. So when we talk about how are people still doing this, is because there's certain cultures and pockets that are still practicing these type of narratives, right? Why is it that you have to prove my humanity to say that you shouldn't knock me unconscious? Why is it that you have to prove my humanity to figure out that, hey, I can have a conversation with you, and just, you know, if it's something about a license plate or something like that, we can have a civil conversation and we can iron that out. That's then going into already preconceived notions about the person that I am because of how I look, right? And this is why changing of the images, just because I'm Black, some of the things would be, oh, that I'm lazy, that I cannot speak for myself, right? That I can take abuse. You can beat me and I won't be hurt. There's history of this where the speculum used to do to check for vaginal births, where they did that to a lot of Black women and said, oh, they don't feel pain the same as some of us do because of their race. And so this is what we're talking about, this type of the imagery of what it means for a Black person to be Black, and that we can continue to do this behavior, or other people of color, that we can still do this because they're not human. They're less civil than we are. So how do we stop, right? This narrative is the images that we share, the stories that we share. When we see others of other colors, right, that are having struggles or other things like that, how can we help and support to uplift you without having to make you be like us? Because everyone's culture is specific to them, and honoring it, right? And so I stand right here, I say it as a voice of those that have been systemically oppressed and underserved, right? Because a lot of them cannot voice and say, how I'm being treated is not okay. Why do I have to jump through so many loops to tell you I'm human just like you? Like I said, right, David, you have a wife, you have children. I have a husband, I have children. I have a mother and a father. I have a grandfather and a grandmother, right? Or I did. I have ancestors that date back just like you do. We may come from different places, right? We have a heart beating, we have blood flowing through our bodies, we have a brain, we have eyes, we have nose, we have mouth. There are a lot of similarities. Until we can start to address the root of these problems that we're talking about, we're going to see these things happen. That means everyone, no matter your position, like you're using your podcast to get the word out, you're using your website to get the messages out, that this is the way we convey and say, we're going to change this narrative. We're going to change and say that, you know what, I respect the people. I want to judge them based on their character, not how they look, right? What is the character that shows up with me? And then I'll be able to go and address it. And we can work together that way. And so that happening again, that's why I want people to know, this is not a one-off. Sometimes the stories don't even happen. I have community members that things like this have happened to, and they just went silent because they didn't know how to speak up. Because there was a time where if you spoke up, the punishment would be worse. And that's the change, right, that we're making right now.
You talk about speaking, Nakia. Something sort of occurred to me. sometimes you see, this is not your case, but sometimes you see videos where somebody is talking back to the officers, not being threatening, just talking back to them, maybe saying something that is insulting, right? And you see officers in that instance just beat the, living daylights out of the person. That's against the law. You're not allowed to beat somebody up because it hurt your feelings by saying something. Doesn't matter if you're a police officer. You don't have that special privilege that they're not allowed to say. The offensive thing in your case, what you're talking about speaking, and David, you watch it, you'll get this, that she's not even talking back to them. She's not even saying anything insulting. What she's doing is very politely explaining to them what she's doing and trying to comply with the various commands that they're giving her, and trying to de-escalate the situation for them, making them feel good. And I think these police officers, the way that they reacted, it seems clear that they simply said, "How dare you speak in our presence?" The arrogance here, the abuse of power has gotten so much here. How dare you just speak? And so we're going to just detain you right now for just speaking, trying to just tell us and de-escalate the situation. And then they escalated it to the point where they knocked her unconscious in front of her family. Just think about that. Think about the level of abuse of power there.
Now, let me ask you this, because, I read their statement of what happened, and they claim, and granted, I don't see any of this on the video, and I've watched the video several times, including frame by frame. They claim that she ignored orders to get back in the video. She resisted the deputies, slipped her hand out of the cuffs, and then struck a deputy in the face. Now, it's hard to see what's going on when everybody's on the ground, but I don't see any of that.
Well, yeah, you don't see it because it didn't happen. We are going to watch play by play. I'm going to sit these deputies down in a deposition. And I'm going to go through it play by play, frame by frame. And I am going to have them admit their lies, because they're lying. This deputy lied so many times on camera, McCampbell, and so did the other one, McDowell. They lied so many times, and they made up such a web of lies. It's all recorded. It's all there. So I am going to go through it step by step with them and show it. What are they doing? They basically, because they had knocked her, he got that deputy, those two deputies, they got so angry at how dare this Black woman speak in their presence at all, regardless of what she's saying, regardless of the fact that she's de-escalating. How dare she speak in their presence? They felt like beating her up. And that's what they did. And after they knock her out and they don't realize, what kind of damage they've done, they start freaking out and they start making up their stories, and they know their buddies are going to cover for them. And that's exactly what was happening. That is the other very insulting part of this story, is after they violate her civil rights, they continue to do it by fabricating stories against her just to get her prosecuted. It wasn't enough to knock her unconscious in front of her family. That wasn't enough. They then took it to the next level, put her in jail. Why? Because we gave them the power to do that. We trusted them, and they abused it. Right? They abused their power at every step of the way here.
It did.
It didn't stick because the video doesn't support it. Right? That their story is totally false.
Yeah. And it's now, as we tell these stories, right, and going through, for those listening, right, and you listening, you hear the story and it's sad. Oh, yeah, it's sad. I live it daily, right? I live it daily. When I hear a police siren coming back, I'm immediately hit with so much anxiety. so much anxiety. A lot of Black people already have that in general, and we're not even doing anything wrong. And now I have that excessively, because here I am doing everything right, speaking, looking for clarification. And none of that is acknowledged. As if, like you said, to be seen and not heard. I'm there, but my voice doesn't matter. I'm here, but they're gonna do whatever it is that they wanna do, which was to take me out of view of the camera so they could do what? The worst fear. These things were just happening. George Floyd just happened. Like you said, the other person, it just happened. And you talk about the cuffs, I have no clue whether they accidentally or didn't tighten it correctly, right? Or they did it intentionally. That I don't know. What I do know is they took me out of the view of the camera and beat me up. They punched me in my head multiple times. So much so when all of this started to come back in view, I started feeling as if I just got punched in my head that same day. And I talk through it, I go through therapy. So people that you need support, you need healing. There's a book called The Body Keeps Count, where as early as children going through, which my children went through this, we have no idea of how much it has impacted them. It may not come out until years later because some of them were so young and they don't have words to describe. Mommy was taken away. Mommy did not show up last night. Mommy's home. My children still come and sleep in the bed with me. And I wasn't there. Where was I? In jail, like a criminal, for switching drivers, for doing the right thing with my father, with my children. My father, my husband, who wasn't there because he was traveling with family to visit family. We are family. They broke up and they're tearing apart family. That in a society that wants to build, that wants to be harmonic, wants to be in harmony, wants to be peaceful, wants to talk about love, wants to talk about compassion. This did not model compassion. The officers, those in uniform, did not model compassion. It was very neglect. They were negligent in their actions, not mindful of the impacts of what it is that they were doing. And who has to put the pieces together? I'm trying to put the pieces together for myself, which for Black people in our culture is, okay, we're dealing with so many stresses, negative images in the media, right? On an ongoing basis, on the job, in corporate spaces, where a lot of us can't even wear our hair naturally because it's offensive or it's threatening. Having to deal with that and then still having to go to work. I was afraid I was gonna lose my job. Now I was gonna lose my job because I went to jail. Now I went to jail. For what? How do I explain to people? We didn't have no video that you were able to see, David. Thank you for sharing your opinion of what you can see, because that's what I've been living with. And then for me to see it brought back so much more that, oh my gosh, they knocked me out. When they first started hitting me, I was like, they're gonna kill me. My hands are tied behind my back. I can't do anything. So how do I still end up being the criminal? That's what we have to look at. How do I still end up being the criminal? I'm not. I'm not.
Well, and you weren't charged with anything, I think, because the DA's office could also very clearly see that there was nothing to charge. They were just fabricating a story. Anyone can see that watching the video. So,
and not being charged, but the fact going through the action and the motions, no one should have to go through the motions just to go through the motions.
Absolutely. I mean, what I'm saying is that they treated you like a criminal because they put you under arrest. They did all of that. They tried their best to make you a criminal, but you're not. And the video shows that the DA didn't file charges because they were lying, and it's so clear they were lying. David, in many circumstances, I'm glad the DA did the right thing here, but that doesn't always happen. That doesn't always happen. A lot of times you'll see DAs turn around and file charges where they shouldn't be filed just to protect the officers.
That's why.
And so that is another abuse that needs to be addressed. That, thank goodness it didn't happen here, but that happens.
One of the first trials I covered in 2010, these brothers were down by the river in West Sacramento, and they got into a confrontation with the police, and the police hit them so many times in the head with a baton that the one guy had dents in his forehead, like he's walking around with dents, and they end up charging the guys with battery on a police and resisting arrest. And like, it went to trial first in 2007. I caught the second one in 2010, and I went to a third trial. The first two hung 11-1 for guilt. And I talked to, after the second trial, I talked to the one guy that hung the jury, and he said, I don't know what those guys are seeing, but I was never going to, convict those guys. I was willing to stay there forever, and hold out. And then finally, the third one, they got acquitted on one of the charges, and the DA decided not to charge him for the fourth time. The cops should have been charged. The guy suffered brain damage. He actually ended up dying last year, like 15 years after the fact. But here they are. They're bringing these minor charges against these brothers who they beat the hell out of. It was absolutely appalling, and that was right here in Yolo County.
And that's because when they do that, then they help to protect the officers unjustifiably many times. And there's somehow this notion that, well, I mean, the person didn't get convicted, but when you get arrested, that in and of itself is very traumatic. You get arrested, you get booked, you get taken down, you're not home, you have to be bailed out. And then when they charge you, the charge itself turns your life upside down. You got to hire an attorney. You have consequences at work that you may have to face. Even getting arrested, you may have consequences at work. You may get fired. There are a lot. There's a social stigma associated with it, whether you get convicted or not. There's a lot of harm that comes from just being in the process. And what these folks are doing is they're making up, they're making up charges against Nakia to put her through all of that after they're the ones that broke the law and abused her. I mean, you see how offensive that is, and you see how much power we've given them. But if we're going to give them that power, then we also have to hold them accountable when they abuse the power. And I think that's where we need to improve the system, is that there has to be more accountability, because if there's not, there's going to be just rampant abuses of power that are going to continue.
Nakia, I wanted to ask you, what happened to your kids? You said that you were arrested, your father was arrested, your kids were left on the side of the road. How did that, what ended up happening with them? I'm just curious.
Clarification. So when I came to after being knocked unconscious in the back of the car, they were radioing in that there's 3 J's in the back. Already kind of a little disillusioned about what just happened. I'm like, you're talking about my children? You're talking about the 3 children. And I can see them escorting my dad out of the car into the other patrol car, right? So the children are in the car. Imagine the 3 children, 6, 4, and 3 in the car. They just woke up because we had smoothies. It was a good time. They were all doing the best that they could. They were sleeping. So now they're startled. It's dark. The doors are wide open and I can see there's just people coming around. So now they're in fear. They're in the car. They're not on the side. They're still in the car. And they're asking the children to come out of the car after having my dad come. And I pray, God, please do not let them come out of the car. Because if they can do what happened to me, I don't see them not doing anything like that and harming my children. So what happened after that time, right? My dad getting back in, there was time. The doors were still open. They were getting ready to take me. Oh, you wanted to add in, Yasin?
Yeah, what I wanted to say is that, you know, there was a long period of time, almost an hour, that the kids were left alone in the car. After having witnessed all of this trauma with officers with guns drawn and all of that. What I would say is, because we have, you know, pending litigation here, in terms of the effects on the kids, we'll kind of let the experts speak to that, because this sort of trauma is, from what I understand, it's very traumatic for children to have to go through something like this, and it really rips their foundation. And kind of, you know, I would say we can sort of leave it at that, and let sort of the experts talk about that.
And that's fine. I mean, that really, I think, paints the picture of what these guys did. I mean, leaving 3 kids in the back of a car without their parents for an hour. My kids would have torn the car apart. So so anyway, I'll
Or
leave it at
torn
that
their
as well.
minds apart, really. I mean, imagine how scared you'd be, because you've got all these strange people with guns who, you know, for these kids, that's what it is. Strange people with guns who just took their mom away and beat her up. You don't know where she is, and they just took her grandpa. And the kids are alone, and they have to sit through that while these officers are walking around with their guns everywhere, rummaging through the car. There's no reason to look through the car. No reason. Complete violation of privacy in the 4th Amendment. No reason. And the rummaging through the car with kids there, scared. Whose kids wouldn't be scared? You know, my kid, think about it. My 3-year-old, somebody who's really friendly comes into the house, one of my friends who he doesn't know, and he comes into the house and he's talking to me. My kid runs behind me and hides behind my leg, okay? Because he's somebody that he hasn't seen and he's seeking shelter. Where was these kids' shelter? It was taken away from them. This was done by law enforcement officers who were there to serve and protect. Think about that for a second.
Well, also, it just seems like, you know, even if you consider their actions legit, with Nakia treating the kids like that, doesn't seem like a reasonable approach. I mean, you would want somebody there, or to make sure that the kids are taken care of, and it seemed like that wasn't a consideration.
Well, I mean, it's all illegitimate, right? What they were doing to Nakia in front of her kids was also illegitimate to the kids. You often hear of cases of, you know, domestic violence, and it's well received by the courts that when 2 adults physically engage in an altercation in front of a child, that's child abuse. That's abusing the child, because it leaves the child very, very scared. So they didn't just do this to Nakia. They did it to the whole family. You talk about, you know, one of the speakers that we had with one of our support groups, he pointed out that it harkened him back to the time of slavery, where you know, the Black women would be abused, and their fathers and husbands would have to just sit and watch, because otherwise everybody would be killed, right? And that happened here. That happened here because he's a father, and he's having to make this choice to sit there. He has to protect his grandkids. He has to stay there in the car so they don't shoot Nakia and him and harm the kids. And all the while, they're beating her up. He knows she's 5'2", 125 pounds. And these two are large officers, both the female and the male. And they both are on her, beating her up. I mean, come on. The lack of humanity here is just incredible.
Yeah. So we're just about out of time. But you have a civil suit. Where does that stand, and has there been any indication by either the DA or the Attorney General that they may re-examine the officer's conduct here?
So the civil suit that we have is ongoing. It's in its nascent stages. We're waiting to have a conference with the judge so we can start discovery, formal discovery. And in terms of a criminal case, you know, it's unfortunate that the sheriff, in the face of just overwhelming evidence, has sided with these deputies who, you know, showed lawlessness. The DA has yet to respond to our inquiries to see, you know, where, if they have a criminal investigation, where it is, because the DA has a responsibility to have this investigated and charge these officers. And we're also waiting for word from the Attorney General's office as well. So, you know, we're knocking on the right doors to see what's happening, and you know, we'll see where these folks. Now, the sheriff has declined to do his duty. So let's see what the district attorney does and the Attorney General does. We're waiting to see what happens.
So, Nakia, any closing thoughts?
Yes. As I said, I speak for those, right, that have been systemically oppressed. And those that we talk about allyship, right? And no matter your position, whether it's small or low or high, if you see injustice, stand. Have a backbone. Stand up. Speak up as if you were in that position. Try to place yourself there. The emotions of the families, my family, right? We're standing in solidarity with other families because we know what the impacts are right now. There are other impacts that we really don't have a clue to, but we're doing the best that we can to try to heal through this process. So if you're in a position where you are to be able to make the change and to be the change, you know there's changes that need to be made in this justice system, speak up for those families. Speak up for those individuals as if it were your families that you love, that you support, that you have compassion for, because we need that unity right now. We need that support to make sure that people know that we can't just treat each other this way. It's not okay. And if we can do that, we can then start to actually be the change that we wish to seek in this world. So I'll leave you with that. Be the change.
Yasin, last thoughts?
I guess just kind of bouncing off of what Nakia said. I'm a civil rights attorney right now. I'm a former federal prosecutor, and I can tell you that, you know, just seeing this sort of behavior is extremely offensive that folks would abuse the power like that. And so what I would say is that, you know, I want to reach out for any law enforcement officers that are watching, former, current. You take a look at it from not a perspective of this is my team, that's your team. Seems to be what the dialogue has become now. Take a look at it from the perspective of fairness, justice, the oath that folks in law enforcement the oath they take to uphold the law. And then no matter who it is, even if it's one of your own guys, even if it's a law enforcement officer, hold them accountable to that. Because that's how we're going to get that just society. That's how we're going to build that trust back.
Yes.
If everybody plays by the rules the way that they're supposed to. So that would be my plea to them. Is it don't be on team officer or team civil rights. Be on team justice. You see something wrong, say it's wrong and do something about it.
So I'll offer my last thought here, which is, and I don't mean to minimize this, but these officers messed with the wrong person, the wrong woman. When I first heard Nakia speak a few months ago, it blew me away how passionate and articulate and bright that she is. And I can see that, she's a fighter and this has helped to find her voice. And so, you have a very powerful story now. And unfortunately, a lot of people in your position don't have the opportunity to speak out. And so that gives you the responsibility to keep speaking and keep, bearing witness to what happened to you, because it didn't just happen to you. It didn't just happen to your family. It happens way, way too often. So thank you guys for coming on and sharing your story and sharing your passion. This has been Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald. Join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system.